and yeah, give kind of a feedback of who's watching. So to keep it short, I will now pass over to Inga and to the Hangout discussion. Thanks.
Thank you very much. So hello and welcome to the audience in the actual physical space of the Academy of the Arts, as well as to hopefully our big online audience, which is not able to come to that actual event. So this is actually the last talk of the series, Vertigo of Reality, as well as the first purely, let's say, almost purely online talk. And I'm really delighted to say hi to our speakers again, which is Aaron and Aram and Lindsay. So basically the subject of the talk today will be to talk about the role a bit more and the position that art takes within the digital context. And I think it's really important to never lose the connection, the relationship of art and reality while we're discussing and talking about that. I think what's happening right now is that this, I think it's an actually interesting point that the whole digital space arrived in our reality and is unfolding onto our real world and in a way onto us. And I think it is really necessary and really important to think about how art can and how art should, and I guess is even able to influence and change our perspectives on the world that we live in now and on our so-called reality. So I think one of the questions is as well that how art gets influenced by these movements as well as vice versa. So how does our reality get influenced by art, and what is the opinion of an artist or of a photographer or of a curator that will join us tonight. So therefore, as we said, we've invited the three speakers. I think everyone in their own way is really well connected to the digital lifestyle and they're working really directly on and with that medium. And in a really applied way, I would say as well. So, and I think they have loads to add about this this construction, deconstruction, hopefully about a right definition of this new reality we kind of find ourselves in now. So I'm just going to say a few words about you guys, and then I would like to hand over the word to you if you're fine with that. So I would start with Aram, who's in the middle now. Aram is a German-based artist and a German artist as well, German-born, who mainly works in the relationship between online and offline, between the online and offline world, giving the internet topics kind of a physical gesture most of the time in his works. He's a member of the artist group FAT, which is a free art and technology lab. And his work is exhibited really internationally, for example, in the Museum of Modern Art in New York, as well as the Pace Gallery in New York. And for example, in the Dam Gallery Berlin as well, which is specialized on online art. So he's joining us from Stuttgart tonight, if I'm right.
Yes.
Hi, Aaron. So then we have Lindsay Howard, who's usually based in New York and is working from New York, but right now she joins us from London, where she's curating a digital art auction there in collaboration with Tumblr and Philips. So she's a curator and researcher on digital art and also the director of 319 Schools in New York, which is a gallery based on net art. And she's working really closely with artists who are directly working in that field. And our third speaker, which is on the top now, is Aaron Schumann, who's an American-born but UK-based photographer, editor and writer within the field of contemporary photography. He has exhibited his work internationally and contributed to publications such as Art Review, The Modern Painters, or The Guardian. He's also the founder and editor of an online magazine, which is focused on photography, called Seesaw Magazine, and curated the Krakow Photo Month of this year. So what the format of this talk would be, to just lose a few words on that, is that I will now hand over to each of the guests to give a quite informal introduction of themselves and of their work. And then we talk for a bit within the Hangout. And in the end, I would like to open up the discussion to our public, which is actually in the University of the Arts right now. So if you're fine with that, Aram, I would just hand over the word to you.
Yes, sure. Yeah, thank you very much for the introduction. I think it's, well, yeah, I've been talking about these topics for like all my work, dealing with these topics of like what happens when digital comes to us and how's the influence on our lives since 10 years now. And I think it's very interesting, besides my, like, I'm going to show some works, but how very clearly with like, after the Snowden leaks, like, which is lasting for 1 year now, this whole discussion about surveillance made super clear that really there's a huge impact, right? I mean, 10 years ago, maybe you still would talk to people like, yeah, but what do you need the internet for? Like, and or there's like doubts or this and this, and yeah, surveillance, maybe there is, and now we really know, like, well, we can have the discussion in arts, right? What about art and digital art, etc. But obviously, there's like something very big going on already for a decade, and it's like this, all these services collecting data, and it's for me, this is very clear, or I think it's a very obvious way on how this unfolding of digital like happens. Well, still we don't feel it, right? When data is collected, we don't know. Like, I don't know when and what something was taken from this phone, so it's hard to get an idea and to feel it. But it's people have been talking about this for a long time, and now we are living with it. So I'm going to just quickly show projects. I have to put this in 1 second. Share screen. So now you should see this.
Yeah, we can see it.
Okay. Yeah, this is like one of these well-known projects called Map. It's about Google Maps and the map marker, which is in the middle of this, always in the middle of the map in the Google search interface. It casts a speech bubble. It becomes part of the city somehow. And I started to make these in 2006 as sculptures in public space. So it's a very, very direct translation of something you see online. You get used to it. Like, it's used in this like online search service. Google has a very powerful position in the market now, also especially in localized information. And this is like a symbol on how perception of reality is changing through these services. And they're not putting up these markers, but they very well will enter the billboard market at some point, I'm sure. And for me, these sort of projects symbolize very much these, I don't know, the era on how internet and the whole online world kind of takes effect and has repercussions on our perception. That's a very typical piece, and also very obvious. More recent works, well, I've been doing also a lot, like this project I've been doing 10 years ago. It's a mobile phone pouch which blocks the signal, so it's all about the communication. I do these workshops with in public, in conferences, and people can make their own mobile phone pouch where for little money, and you have nice discussions in these workshops about how surveillance is affecting our privacy. Here's a picture of the mobile phone pouch, which is like it's a shielding material. It's very simple in a way. It's a Faraday cage where the signal can't leave, and also no other signal can connect to the phone. For me, it's very symbolic in that way that we have these highly developed devices we depend on a lot, and at the same time, you have this simple pouch which is kind of knocking out the phone. And also it's like, yeah, we don't know today anymore. Like, is the phone off? Like when you turn it off, right? It's like there are all these privacy questions in this context. Well, maybe also this is also one of the more well-known projects. Deadrops is an offline file-sharing network I did in started in 2010 in New York when I was at IBM, and everybody can do a Deadrop. It's like this little flash drive which is cemented into a wall, and you can walk out with your computer and find files on there. You can also leave files on a Deadrop. The first 5 Deadrops were made in New York City, in these places here, and it became a big network. There's a website to it. This is how it looks like when you when you download information or upload information. And this was done in 2010, where surveillance was like, I mean, there's like all these topics were like also part of my work in a certain way, but it became way more important now, or the discussion became bigger. And I was very much interested in this gesture of the data is literally cemented into the wall, and you have to go to the place. It's not online in the internet. It's not like one of those cloud services, but you have to go there. It might be dark and wet outside, and you don't know what's on there. There might be a virus on there. So there's all these implications which are opposite to what we are used to see, and like how we use data and how we use computers in the connection of public space. So I like very much to work in public space. I like to do workshops with groups. Well, and there's a whole bunch of more projects. A lot of them is about computer games and about game spaces and how they relate to our spaces today. What would it be like to walk your real name in public space? So I do these workshops where we build our names from cardboard and mount them on plastic strips, and like in an online gameplay, we walk each other names. And this is, in fact, it's interesting because for me it was always like this, getting an idea how the future might be, or what would it be like to be more public in like with your privacy. But also today, sort of these pictures mean like the data is already there. Like they're collecting these data all the time, and they can put signs to us, right? We don't see them, but this is actually happening. It's not a game. Maybe it's a game we live in, but we don't know. Okay. I think this is like a short, brief overview, right? This is good from time?
This is really good. Thank you very much, Aaron. Yeah. I think there's loads to come back to anyways, and loads of material to work on. Before that, I would like to hand over the word to Lindsay. I think I was thinking about reading a short quote of one of your essays you wrote that I thought personally describes your work and the way of thinking from your point of view quite well. So if you don't mind, I read that, and then I give you I hand over the word to you. So you wrote, we can intuit a wide range of political opinions and emotion related to the buying, selling, and distribution of the art online, effectively establishing the incredible potential of this medium. This shit is deep. So
thanks.
This is really good from Aram as well with the simultaneously graphic. So yeah, maybe you can just like pick up on that and just give us a little introduction.
Sure. So for the last 5 years, I've been the director of 319 Shoals, as you mentioned. I curate exhibitions that bring net art into physical space, that people have a sort of contemplative distance, that they can experience and interact with the works in person. And that translation process is dealt with in a number of ways, depending on the artist's practice and the goals that they have for that space. Sometimes it's a one-to-one translation where we put a monitor up on a screen we put a monitor in the gallery and put the work on the screen, or sometimes it's the artist interpreting the work in an installation or something else that really takes into consideration the physical components of it. And what I discovered after working in this project space for about 3 years was that these artists were making incredible work, but they didn't have a necessary market around it to really support them and be able to push this to the next level. So I started doing a lot of research into experimental monetization models, and I curated an exhibition, actually a retrospective of the collaborative group that Aram is involved with, the Free Art and Technology Lab. I'm interested in creating experimental models that accelerate the market for digital work, and I'm also really interested in the complicated issues surrounding open source work and giving away information and art projects for free online, and how that changes the way that we consider it or value it. So I wanted to just show a few of the different pieces to give a sense of how I'm thinking about digital. So about a year ago, I curated an exhibition called CREAM, stands for Cash Rules Everything Around Me. And this is an online exhibition that showcased artists who are politically engaged in open source art and technology, and then also use their creative practice to address issues related to monetization of net-based work. So these pieces were all thinking about how you could generate monetary value online, as opposed to in the sharing economy, when you like an article or if you like an artwork, you post it on your Facebook, and then maybe it gets 100 likes or 200 likes, and that's some sort of sense of a value for it. So what I was interested in, and what this platform, Art Micro Patronage, was interested in, is if someone has the energy to press like or has the energy to press fave, will they give 5 cents for a work or 10 cents for a work to support the artist's practice so that they can continue to create this work? From doing these kind of more experimental research, I was actually contacted by Phillips Auction House, formerly Phillips Dupury, which is a traditional auction house, one of the major #3 auction houses in the world. And they're interested in the market for digital work and have invited me to curate an exhibition and auction of solely digital pieces. So the first one I did last October, and included pieces ranging from websites, YouTube videos, animated GIFs. There are digital paintings printed onto aluminum and sculptural pieces. The way that I define digital art and think about it is that it's works that employ computers as a fundamental part of the creative process, but it might end up being an output of that work that is the finished product. So some artists who are making physical digital paintings, if the essential process is made on a computer and then printed on canvas or printed on aluminum or whatever it might be, then would still consider that digital work. So I wanted to show you this example here. This is Petra Courtright, and this is called her video catalog. So since 2007, she's been uploading these videos, performative webcam videos, to YouTube. And because the platform and framework is so important for the way that people engage with it, she actually prices each individual video based on the number of view count. So if you go to her YouTube and you watch her videos, that increases the view count, and that number times a certain standard figure equals the current number, or equals the current value of the work. So this is an artist who's really disrupting the idea of having scarcity as a way to generate value. She's actually encouraging people to share her work, to allow it to participate in the network, and that through that, it will continue to generate interest and excitement. Another artist who we included in this sale is ifnoyes.com. That's the work, and the artist's name is Raphael Rosendahl. And he makes these interactive, sometimes not, full browser websites where the title is the URL. And you can't see in this browser because I'm on Chrome, so it doesn't have the title bar. But if you're a collector and you're interested in supporting his practice, if you buy one of these, he transfers the URL to the collector, and then your name would go in the title bar up along here. So it would say ifnoyes.com by Raphael Rosendahl in the collection of Aaron Bartal or whoever it might be. So this is a new generation of artists who are thinking not only about creative practice online, but also about monetization models that are creative and reflect their practice. Since we're on the subject of talking about space, I wanted to play one quick video of a work that is going up for auction tomorrow by an artist named James Bridle, who's based in New York.
Lindsay, can you hear me?
Yeah.
It doesn't work with the video. I think it's too...
Oh, it doesn't? Oh, okay.
The connection is too bad and we don't hear the sound. Maybe you can just
okay, sure. I'll just tell you about it then.
Yeah,
so this is a piece.
Thanks.
This is a piece by James Bridle. What he's done is he's looking at these theoretical drawings that were made by an Italian architectural group in the late 1960s called Super Studio. They created these theoretical drawings of this piece of architecture that would span the whole length of the world. And it's something that you could interact with. It's something you could get energy from. And they were never drawn and they were never made in physical space. So when James was going back and looking through this, he thought that this actually seemed like a really natural precursor to the internet and the way that it would connect people. So for his project, he has created this, he's rendered these hypothetical theoretical drawings in a 3D program and then put it into Google Earth. So what we're selling is this print. It's a physical print of this over Manhattan, and then also a digital file that you can download and interact with inside of Google Earth. So the experience is both physical, and then there's also a digital component to it. I could talk more about a couple of other works.
Yeah, you can talk about one more if you have another one.
The other project that I think is really interesting is this bouquet by Sarah Ludi. And this comes from a series called Projection Monitor, in which she documents scenes from Second Life, which is a 3D virtual world where you can sign in and you have an avatar and can basically experience an online world with other people. So as her avatar, she roams the virtual landscape until she finds something of interest, and then she photographs it with her iPhone. And so by bringing her iPhone up to the screen and photographing it, she's trying to capture her subjective physical experience of navigating this 3D world. And what's interesting in this particular piece is this sort of collection of pixels on top of the bouquet. It's a subtle yet significant little grouping because it indicates that's something that someone used to create the 3D picture of this bouquet, and then have either chosen to deliberately keep it in there or accidentally have left it in there. And for Sarah, she finds that really interesting because it indicates this kind of desire to create something human and something beautiful in digital space, but with it always within the limitations of this specific environment. And her whole project, she does a lot of different documentation in Second Life. She does these screenshots. She also does field recordings. It's not dissimilar to the way that someone would document a physical landscape, just that it happens to be in a 3D virtual world.
Okay, cool. Thank you. very much for now, Lindsay. I think there's loads to come back to as well, especially in terms of the value. And then I think it might be really interesting to talk a bit more about the actual business point and the point of selling art and how does that, or how did that change? Before we do that, I would hand over to Aaron for a short introduction.
Great. Hi. Right. So I'm Aaron Schumann. I'm a photographer, but also a writer and curator of photography. So my real interest here is the relationship between digital culture and the photographic medium. I've got a quick. Sorry, I'm just going to set this up. Okay, so I've got a quick presentation here. Right. So can you see that all right?
Yeah, I can see it. I think.
Yeah. Okay, great.
We can't see it yet. Yeah. No. Now we can see it. Thanks.
Okay, great. So this is a quote that the artist and photographer and designer Moholy Nagy said in 1932. The illiterate of the future will be the person ignorant of the use of the camera as well as the pen. And I'm really interested in this quote. I mean, it's an 80-year-old quote, 80 plus years, but I think it's really interesting that it's kind of foreshadowing something that's happening a lot more now, which is that photography is becoming a genuine medium within digital culture, where people are actually communicating, speaking, writing to each other, and using it as a tool of communication between one another in a way that's kind of unparalleled in the past in terms of the medium's history. I recently curated a festival in Krakow, the Photo Month in Krakow Photo Month, and I was interviewed, and the interviewer for this magazine, Lens Culture, said to me, "So you're a curator, a photographer, a writer, a magazine editor. How do all of these things fit together?" And my response was, "We're in this incredible situation where photography is growing exponentially. It surrounds us every day, but there's this concern amongst real photographers about how to define ourselves, how to become something unique and differentiated. My idea is that we don't have to separate ourselves from everybody, but we do have to become much more versed, not only in the making of pictures, but also understanding photography as a medium, contextualizing our work and communicating those ideas to other people. To put it differently, I think photography has become a medium much like writing. Anyone can pick up a pen and paper and write a poem or a letter or an article, but there are some people who are really good at it and dedicated to the craft. Often they write literary criticism as well as books, as well as edit other writing and so on. Writers spend an enormous amount of time thinking about the medium, reading other writers, explaining why good writing is important, and I think photographers are in a similar position. So I'm really interested in this this idea of photography as a form of almost writing, or a medium that's become something much more like writing, where people are using. I mean, if you think about the history of photography and our use of it, even in a vernacular sense, it was never used necessarily to communicate so much with, on a personal level, in the way that platforms like Facebook and Tumblr and Instagram are using it. So I think it's really interesting that it's kind of taking over words in a lot of ways within the digital sphere. In 2004, I started a magazine called Seesaw Magazine, which is a photographic magazine. And to be honest, the only reason I started it online was a financial reason. It was, a lot cheaper to build a website than to start, to publish a print magazine. And it still functions and forms, and the design is very much like a traditional magazine, but it exists online. But the reason I started this magazine was really to have access to photography and photographers and give access to other people to photography and photographers that I'm personally interested in, and I think are developing really interesting bodies of work. But what I was struck by was the fact that when I started publishing this magazine 10 years ago online, that my audience grew exponentially and grew very rapidly through the digital culture and digital media, much more so than it would have ever done as a print magazine. And it also gave me, by doing it digitally, it gave me access to images a lot easier and a lot quicker and a lot cheaper. It gave me access to photographers and to artists that I was interested in talking to about photography. So I kind of fell into becoming a magazine editor as a photographer who's genuinely kind of interested in other people's work. But I fell into it through this kind of digital format, which which was really important. And off the back of working on Seesaw, I've since been offered and invited to curate several exhibitions. So in 2010, I was invited to curate an exhibition for a festival that happens called PhotoFest. It happens in Houston, Texas every 2 years. It's a biennial. And the theme of that year was contemporary American photography or contemporary US photography. And so I was living, and I am living in England at the time. I was living in England. So when I was given this this kind of brief of exploring contemporary American photography, much of my experience and much of my research was happening in a digital format and online. But like I said before, I'm very interested in this kind of relationship between the history of photography and this medium that really is a 19th century medium, and how it's evolving and developing within a 21st century context. But I want to make sure that there's not kind of a break between those two things. I think there's a very interesting kind of relationship between the past and the present, and what ultimately would be the future. So this exhibition was very much interested in kind of developing and linking and paralleling the past and the present. So it started off with a project that was exhibited at the Museum of Modern Art in 1938, called American Photographs by the photographer Walker Evans. And in the introduction to this book that was the result of the exhibition as well, the introduction states, Walker Evans elevated the casual, the everyday, and the literal into specific permanent symbols. And so he, as a photographer and as an artist, he celebrated for this notion that he was able to transform in the early 20th century the casual and the everyday into something that was symbolic and meaningful. And I think that's something that's become that was something unique at the time to Walker Evans and other artists and photographers like him. But it's become very commonplace. This is what we do on a daily basis. When we post a picture on Facebook or we send a picture to a friend via email, we're constantly elevating the everyday, the literal, into kind of permanent symbols. So the title of the exhibition also came from this introduction, which stated, his pictures exist to testify to the symptoms of waste and selfishness that caused the ruin, and to salvage whatever was splendid for the future reference of survivors. So the exhibition was titled Whatever Was Splendid, and it's really this kind of understanding, trying to understand contemporary American photography through the work of Walker Evans, but also in a digital context. My experience and my research was happening in this digital sphere. So I was interested in how the everyday and the literal were being kind of transformed into permanent symbols. So my research, these are some examples of Evans's project, American Photographs. What I think is really interesting about this body of work in a contemporary context is that it's incredibly eclectic and diverse as a body of work. So he's doing portraits, landscapes, interiors, exteriors, still lifes, shop fronts. He's photographing anything and everything in a really eclectic manner. And I think this is something that's become, again, much more commonplace now that we exist in a digital culture where we're experiencing images in a very eclectic manner. And this is something quite unique. Quite often photographers' bodies of works can be quite repetitive, or there are typologies, there are kind of formats that photographers take to kind of to contain their work. And I think what's interesting about Evans's project from the 1920s and 30s is that it's very eclectic, and a screen grab like this is not too dissimilar to something you might experience on Google Image. So I started doing research trying to kind of match photographs from contemporary American photographic culture to images from Evans's work. And this was simply an exercise of research, but a way to kind of link the past and the present. And I started finding these really kind of interesting kind of links between Evans's work and the work that was being made in a contemporary sense. So these are just a few examples of something that, again, is occurring in a digital sphere quite often. This notion that you can kind of upload an image to Google image search, and another image will appear that is either the same image or an image that for some reason Google's programming reads it similarly. So this was a kind of an analog version of that, but I was interested in this kind of relationship between these images that come from the past, from the early 20th century, and how they relate to images from the 21st century. So I'll scroll through these very quickly, but you can see there's a kind of relationship building between the past and the present. then off the back of that, the exhibition ended up being incredibly eclectic, and that was really important to me, that this idea of kind of representing contemporary American photography be something that is incredibly diverse. It incorporated appropriated imagery. It had traditional kind of 5x4 images. It had images that had been downloaded or been sent to the artist and reconfigured into different projects. So the overall exhibition again became incredibly eclectic, very diverse, rather than being something where I was kind of making a statement about American photography is one thing. Instead, it was something that was incredibly kind of broad and vibrant and kind of stretched in all different directions. But the link between all of those things was Evans, Walker Evans's work. So the reason I bring that up is simply to kind of show how, as a curator and as somebody that was asked to do a project like this, I use the digital environment, but that digital environment is not only a kind of place of research, but it's also it also influences the final result and how something kind of comes out in the end. Subsequently, I was asked by a publishing house called Self Publish Be Happy to do a project. To curate something on their website, to curate kind of a train of 10 images that would kind of link to one another. So I was interested in, there was a photographer called Stephen Shore who when he first experienced Google Image and Flickr was really disappointed, because the prospect that in his imagination, the prospect of having millions, if not billions of people uploading their photographs and having access to all of those photographs meant that photographs would be incredibly diverse and rich, and photographic culture would kind of broaden in a sense. And he was really disappointed to discover that when you type in a word like paradise or sunset, you actually end up getting very, very similar images over and over and over. It's very repetitive. So for this project, I was kind of trying to subvert that notion of this kind of repetitive nature of image search, and ended up doing a project called Stranger Than Paradise, where I downloaded images based on Google image searches that represented paradise, but represented it in a slightly stranger format, and then tried to sequence them in a way that would build a different kind of relationship between them, rather than just being inundated with the same type of image over and over. So I started off with this poster for Jim Jarmusch's 1984 film, Stranger Than Paradise, and then built off of that. This is a picture that was downloaded off a kind of image sharing website, and it's a somebody's snapshot of street signs in Pennsylvania where there's towns called Paradise, Desire, and Panic. Then this was a piece by an artist, Todd Heido, which again was simply, I found a relationship between the kind of the telephone wires and how those two things relate to one another. Then this was the darkness of that image led me to Paradise Lost, Milton's Paradise Lost, and this was a scan I found on Oxford University's library website. A high-resolution scan of the first edition of Paradise Lost by John Milton. And then I was interested in that kind of, portrait and the kind of portrait format that the Milton engraving has, so that it turned into a more contemporary body of work by a photographer called Richard Moss, who was photographing in the Congo. So this is a portrait of a general fighting in the Congo, and that led me to Heart of Darkness, which ended up being, so I ended up finding this image of Marlon Brando on the set of Apocalypse Now. Then off the basis of that, I did a Google image search and ended up with this image, which is a found photograph that somebody found where somebody had drawn on the top of a pornographic image, and I just liked the kind of relationship between the two heads, so to speak. And then so the project developed. So what I was really trying to do was subvert and change and kind of utilize Google image search to result in a kind of diverse range of images, rather than a kind of a really monotonous selection of images. And then I'll just quickly, more recently when I was curating this exhibition, this festival in Krakow, I'm using digital context to communicate with the artists. This was a three-dimensional digital model that the artist built, and then we kind of worked through what the exhibition would ultimately look like before installation, but entirely via digital means, by email, via kind of working with the same digital model. But what was remarkable was how how similar the actual experience of going to the exhibition was to the actual digital model. So again, using kind of as a curator, I'm using the digital environment in a way that also translates and becomes a reality in a kind of very strange sense. And then also in a few years ago, I was asked by the Saatchi Gallery in conjunction with Google to conduct a program of hangouts with master classes with well-known and important contemporary photographers. And this was an opportunity for students to basically have a one-on-one or 10-on-1 kind of interaction, roundtable discussion with photographers that they feel are important or influential to their own work, and it was a very kind of informal kind of environment. So to go to a lecture of one of these photographers or to an artist's lecture, it's quite a formal environment and quite a distanced environment between audience and speaker. And this was an opportunity to really utilize something that I was interested in from the start with Seesaw, which was being able to communicate in an informal and a comfortable way with the people that I was interested in working with. And then also, as I said before, I'm a writer. So this was a piece that I wrote for a book called Observed. It was all about surveillance in photography and contemporary photography. And the essay that I ended up writing was very much based on these two bodies of work. The one on the left is surveillance photographs of the suffragette movement in the early 20th century in the United Kingdom. And these were photographs that were distributed to museums and galleries so that they would recognize the suffragettes, because one of the suffragettes had damaged the painting of Venus that you see at the bottom of the screen. They'd gone into the National Gallery, they'd slashed it with a hatchet and then been dragged out. So these were photographs that were distributed. And there were surveillance photographs that were taken of the women. Some of them were appropriated images of the women when they were actresses and so on. Some of the images are pictures that were taken whilst the women were in prison, as they were walking through the prison yard. And other images were kind of images where the women were forced and held so that they would be photographed. And I compared those two images that are now being produced by an artist called Osvaldo Santilli, who did this body of work where he was doing screen grabs of online sex workers, or on sex chat workers, but he was going onto their website, and before they could kind of respond to his presence, he was doing a screen grab and grabbing a picture of them. So there was this kind of really very much, a very personal kind of form of surveillance, where he's photographing these women as they are before they start performing for the camera, so to speak. And I thought this kind of relationship between these two types of women, the struggles, the struggle that the suffragettes were kind of fighting for, and the kind of resulting contemporary context where there are women kind of sitting in front of their laptops, in front of their cameras, waiting for people to look at them, I thought was a really interesting kind of relationship. So just lastly, this is the last thing I'll say is, before we go into the discussion, but this was a conversation that I had with another curator called Charlotte Cotton for Foam, the museum Foam in Amsterdam, and it was subsequently published in their magazine. But in the discussion, I say, for me, the most interesting works coming out right now within photography represent an instigation, the beginnings of something. They're not simply an end result or the remnants of something that's passed and been preserved in silver gelatin, emulsion, or ink. They're starts, sparks, or seeds from which many other things might grow. And Charlotte responded, perhaps that's something that could be credited to this digital phase in our culture, not just in terms of open sourcing and so on, but even on a rudimentary level. The endlessness of digital capture is actually loosening photography up and allowing it to be lots of different things rather than simply a culmination or condensation of something. And my response again was, the technology has shifted, but also the way in which we encounter and engage with photography has shifted. Rather than there being a limited supply of information and images, there's this overwhelming torrent that we all have to sift through on a daily basis. And the process of editing itself has become internalized by everyone. Photographers are cobbling together loads of information in really intricate and often open-ended, non-linear and puzzling ways. But they're not solving these puzzles for the reader or the viewer. They're entrusting their audience with that power. And I think that's really something that's become important, and something I think that digital culture has brought through photography, is this notion that people are becoming much more literate in terms of the medium of photography, and therefore photographers and artists who are using images and promoting and presenting images, whether it's on analog or digital format, are able to kind of trust their audience to kind of sift and edit and interpret in new ways that didn't exist before this kind of digital culture occurred. So that's it from me.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Aaron. I think there was loads of interesting stuff as well, especially in terms of that. I think you're a really good example for showing the new definition or the redefinition of a photographer within your medium, because a photographer nowadays might be not only anymore taking the photograph rather than talking or writing about it, and like a writer can be a photographer and the other way around as well. So I think we could come back to that later as well. What I think is like a really common overall topic, and that combines all the three of you and within your work, is that I would love to kind of in the literal sense talk a bit more about the space itself and the space you are working in or you're working with, and in terms of curational practice as well, maybe Lindsay, that you might have some words to share with us when it comes to, I guess you have to reconstruct and deconstruct the actual gallery space, which was since ever the most physical space we can imagine within an art context, and now you're in this new space, and it's not that cyberspace anymore that we kind of had in our minds in the 90s. It's actually in our real world now. How can you maybe talk a bit about the curational practice and the challenges, and also the maybe the point of decision making? What is the difference there, or maybe you want to pick up on that?
Sure. I think that when you're translating immaterial works into a material space, it comes down to a conversation with the artist about what the essential part of that work is. And it might be the concept, it might be the aesthetic, it might be the tools or the immaterial materials that they were using to create it. And then it's about breaking those parts up and then translating it into a physical space. So trying to think of a good example of one in particular. There's actually a sort of, in terms of preservation and thinking about how you maintain these works over a long period of time, which is obviously something that's incredibly important for museums or for collectors or for artists themselves, and just in terms of keeping together their practice. There's a piece of paper that the Whitney has put together. Aram, do you know what it's called, actually?
Which one?
That is a collaborative effort at the Whitney Museum. It was to put together something that artists could use to identify the essential parts of a work so that it can be maintained properly over a long period of time.
You should know it.
Yeah, maybe I'll Google it and then show it to you. Yeah. But it helps artists think in that way of, like, if you have a multi-channel video installation, and then 10 years from now, we don't have access to machines that look that way. Can we still show the piece, or was it intended to exist only for a certain period of time? Can we show it on updated monitors? Is it that it needs to be shown on VHS? Can it be shown on Blu-ray? Like, what is the essential part of the work? And it's important that the artist is thinking about that at the moment of creation, because it can degrade so quickly. And the best practices and the processes that we have for display are changing constantly.
I think you said something really interesting about, like, you used the words materialization, dematerialization, and maybe Aaron can directly pick on that. I think the photography is a medium which was always so linked with the material itself and with holding a photograph. And
when Lindsay was speaking, it was definitely, I was thinking that I'm kind of dealing with the reverse, which is where the material is becoming immaterial.
Exactly. It's vice versa. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think that's it's really, yeah. I mean, I think the reverse is happening, but it's also a similar dilemma in the sense that with analog photographic techniques, the problem that's always existed with analog techniques is that they degrade so quickly and so rapidly. And so by kind of transforming them into images, digital images rather than analog, there's this idea, or there's a kind of potential for them to exist actually much longer and in a much kind of looser format than they could have done in a material sense, and also to kind of spread through the world in a much quicker and easier manner, and to reproduce themselves much quicker. So I think that it's an interesting kind of conundrum from my perspective to have to kind of transform something that's immaterial into the material, because I'm dealing so often with things that are intended to be material but end up being immaterial.
Can I ask a question, actually?
Sure, go ahead.
I was curious, Aaron, when you were talking about having the online magazine, if curating for the web changed the way that you selected the photographs, or seeing which you can obviously have certain data that indicates, oh, this piece was shared quite a bit or viewed quite a bit, or maybe they zoomed in at this particular point, which is information that you would not have for an analog photograph. And I wondered if that affected it at all, the way that you selected the photographs for your online audience.
I mean, in terms of the type of work I'm selecting, it's much more based on, it's project-based work, and I'm selecting it on the basis of the fact that I'm responding to the ideas as much as the aesthetics. But one of the limitations, obviously, is that the screen is only so big. So scale becomes a real issue. And so I think more than kind of gauging my kind of audience response or the kind of popularity, or what people are responding to, or how they're zooming into things, what I'm always conscious of is the fact that that within kind of contemporary art culture, over the last kind of 20 or 30 years, the photographic medium the scale has kind of multiplied tenfold. It's become, if you're making photography, you can make it any size you want, but if you're making art photography, quite often it's meant to be big and supposed to fill a room. It has to kind of sit within a big white cube and hold a wall. And I think that's produced some really fascinating and interesting work. But from my perspective, I think that also kind of puts a huge amount of limitations on the photograph, and it also really simplifies photography. So I think by going online and making it screen-based, for me at least, in a kind of magazine context or an online magazine context, has been really useful in the sense of really trying to figure out what the picture's about, rather than the kind of impact that it has on a physical level. I don't know if that answers your question, but yeah.
While you were talking, I was just wondering as well about the going back to your online magazine again, and founding it, and facing kind of the ideas of, I think, quite traditional photographers who still want to have their work published. And I think in a photographer's head, it is still the value might be most often. I realize that in my practice that I have to kind of negotiate with them and try to tell them that it's still worth of, like, showing it on a screen and it's not actually printed. How does that work with your magazine? Did you, maybe just talking out of experience, like?
I mean, I think it's changed dramatically in the last, probably in the last 5 years or so, or 5 or 10 years, in the sense that I don't think people are so concerned. I think younger photographers are realizing that print culture isn't necessarily. I mean, the thing now is to have a book. That seems to be the physical kind of presence of the photograph, which I think is a great thing. I think, I feel like I wonder if. I love having photographs on walls. I love seeing photographs in galleries and museums. But ultimately, I think the format of the book is something that's really essential and important to the photograph. And similarly, online, in terms of size and scale, the screen has a huge potential and opportunity that I don't know if it's being fully explored yet, to be a kind of space for photographs and for images to exist. But I know what you mean in terms of this kind of hierarchy that photographers have, that they want to see their pictures in print. I think that's something that's probably going to die out quite quickly, because ultimately what photographers should want is for people to see their images. If their images are dependent upon the physical experience of those images, if it's about the texture of the paper, or about the full the wrinkling, or how it's presented within a frame, within a gallery context, then so be it. But I think for a lot of people, they're making images that are about the kind of the image and not so much about the physical photograph. So I think that's shifting quite dramatically and rapidly. That people are kind of opening up to this idea that it doesn't need to be on a piece of paper or on a glossy magazine for it to be important. And I think the impact that images have online is actually a lot more. It's different, but it has a power that's as strong, if not stronger, than you'd ever experience on a page. It's very easy to flip through a magazine very quickly, and similarly, it's easy to click through a screen. But I think the online, there's a real intimacy involved on the computer.
Yeah, I think as you said, then we're coming quite quickly to the point of discussing it about distribution as well, and that advantages for that, especially I think the young generation, or however we want to call it, might see the potential in it. But to stay a bit more in that kind of space definition or whatever we want to call it, Aram, I told you before I was directly thinking of, when I was thinking of the digital space, and that is maybe quite interesting to what we were talking about with Aaron now as well, that you kind of turn it, let's say, the other way around. You bring most often the dematerialization in a materialization. So as an artist, and I was thinking about the Counter-Strike.
Well, just like to pick up the conversation, for me, these questions are one of those basic questions all the time. How to materialize, or on one hand, when I went to school, we were doing all these digital projects, and then you have this early experience of CD-ROMs die, and then all your data is gone, and the beautiful project is gone. And I quite early developed that need of I want to build this again. How would it be to have this part of the game as a real life object? What would it be like to see certain situations from online experiences in real life? Just to encounter with it, and also do those questions. And so I always all my work is about these online offline relation questions, but all the work is physical pieces. It's sculpture, interventions, performances, also prints. And it's interesting, and at the same time also it's interesting that most of the work is received online again. So I have a web page and stuff spreads online. So it is very much, in a way it stays, and also in the online realm. But the question of how things materialize in physical space is one of the main questions. And you were mentioning the dust map. So this is one of the first, Counter-Strike is a first-person shooter game which I played when I was still in school, beginning of 2000. And it's interesting, these games and these places in the game, you need to know the space very well to master the game, to survive in the game. So I kind of claim that there's a cultural heritage on these spaces, which digital architecture on servers, and that those spaces need to be built. And as I've done a whole series of experiments building part of these spaces, or crates, or sections from this specific gaming map as life-size cardboard or wooden models to pose that question, how many people have been in Stuttgart, London, and Berlin, and how many people have been in this very space? And a lot of people have been in there. And I kind of claim it's cultural heritage and could be a pilgrim place for the gaming community in a way. And maybe in 200 years, you don't know anymore what this is, or maybe you know what this is, but you don't know what the churches are anymore. So it's the question on how also the cultural perception is changing. And it's for me, well, in a way, also with this Google Map Marker 10 years ago, or 2006, it was kind of fresh. Today, this also has a different meaning to myself, because a majority in society made that, has the awareness now, right? I mean, 10 years ago, there was still this not sure, and why do you need it, and today there's like, very little question that, this is happening right now, and the impact is unfolding, right? I mean, digital revolution is much older, but the whole, starting with copyright discussion some years ago, and now it's going into 3D printing copyright discussion, and now we have whatever, like surveillance and drones, and the whole economy is based on like digital trading. So it really is like these little signs I post like some years ago now become part of, I don't know, this awareness era, I would say. Like,
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
Go on.
I mean, with Aaron, with your work, I mean, there seems to be like a genuine kind of desire to give the viewer, to take them out of the virtual or out of the digital realm and kind of give them a real kind of physical experience.
Right.
But Lindsay, I mean, I was curious in terms of some of the artists that you're working with, when they're bringing this kind of immaterial or this digital artwork and turning it into something that's material. Is that quite often driven by the monetary aspect? Is it driven by the fact that they need something that they want to sell, so they can kind of, or if the work is intended for a digital context, is it a means of kind of just supporting their art, or is it, or do they genuinely, I think a lot of conceptual artists, like in the 1960s, conceptual art, when art turned into ideas rather than physical craft, there was a similar kind of debate and difficulty, where people were giving performances or happenings, or and then the only thing they had left were kind of snapshots that somebody else had taken of that event, but those subsequently become the kind of monetized thing. So is there is the physical aspect of it simply driven by a need
driven
for
by
money?
the market?
Yeah.
Well, I think it's different for every artist. It would be really hard to generalize something like that. I think for most of the artists that I've been working with in the project space that I run, it's simply about, this is a physical space. I want to give it a physical treatment. And I want this idea to be communicating accurately through the way that people experience it in physical space. So if you have a website or you have an image that's online, people engage with it in a certain way. But if you go into a gallery, people want to see texture, or they want something more than what they are seeing online. So there's one artist that I'm thinking of, Kate Stessu, who makes these photo collage images from a number of different stock photography sites. And one of the pieces that she recently installed in our space was this giant sticker. And so when she rolled it off the glue, she brought it up to the wall and then threw it up and then scrunched parts of it. So it gave it this amazing physicality. And when you look at it online, it's basically a few images of a mountain.
Right.
And then she wanted to make the physical experience something different.
Okay.
But there are artists who have these broad conceptual practices. And so, for instance, in the auction tomorrow, we have a piece by Amalia Ullman, who has a practice that extends across many different social media platforms, where she essentially takes on these different kind of performative characters for a month or so. And she's very committed to this practice. It affects the way that she lives her life. It affects the way that she dresses. It affects the way she engages with everyone else. But then for the sale, what you buy is a print of that image. And then the collector's name goes into the caption on her Facebook profile, saying that they own this image of her as well as her entire month of January. And something that people are really often very curious about are, if you're buying an image that's on Facebook, or if you're buying an image that's on Tumblr or whatever it might be, doesn't that platform actually have the rights to that image? But in the case of this artist, Amalia Ullman, her practice is really about questioning control and questioning the male gaze and the idea that when you upload any content to these social media platforms that they do own it. So she's already engaging in those questions in an analog way. And so by selling these pieces, she's essentially selling herself or selling her online identity. So it's not quite as simple as making something physical to sell it. sometimes often actually, there is some conceptual reason why an artist would want to sell, and it has an intention and a purpose to it.
When somebody buys it online, though, is the access limited at all, or is it still public access?
For most of these artists, it's a hardcore, old school thing where you want to keep it online and viewable to the public. And so they have different strategies for doing that. So like I was saying, Petrichor writes actually accrue value as long as you keep them online, or Raphael's website is maintained in a way that the collector is required to keep it online. Because if you take the internet out of these works, then you're essentially neutering half of the power that they have, because they generate that interest through their network.
Yeah, because photography obviously went through a very similar thing where it's a medium, not too dissimilar to images or websites online, where it's infinitely reproducible. The fact that you can make these images kind of, you can make a million prints of them. And so, of course, when the art market for photographs started to develop, there was this kind of embedded kind of decision that, okay, now we're going to have limited prints, and that's how we're going to kind of accrue value and increase value. But it's such a kind of false kind of, it's such a false way to behave towards a medium that is reproducible.
Right.
And, so I was just, I was curious in terms of, how that's happening in kind of a digital context, that there are these websites that anybody and everybody should have access to, but once they're bought, are they kind of, are they then turned off and only the collector is, the person that gets to see these things? But it's nice to know that the artists themselves want these things to remain public. Yeah,
and with the websites, pretty much the only thing on the internet that's scarce is a URL. You can't have ifnoyes.com with some /2 or something and have it be someone else's website. You own that. So I think Raphael Rosendahl discovering that and then formalizing it was really productive for a lot of artists who have browser-based practices.
Yeah. Aram, how are you in that sense?
I mean, as you said, my practice is all based on these physical pieces. I don't have this question myself about how to get this thing off the screen and blah blah blah. But I also have quite some years curatorial practice where I have a lot of friends in net art, and I always liked very much that question, how to show these sort of screen-based works in physical space, like in galleries, also in other places. So I started, for example, in 2010, the series called Street Shows, and everybody was invited to make their own, to create a show, to curate a show. And the idea was to go to an internet cafe, to rent all the computers and to say, okay, this is the gallery for tonight. We're renting all the machines for €1 per hour. We have an opening with champagne or beers, and each computer has one piece on it. And then after the night, you just walk out and you pay at the desk and you're done with your show. So it's really because that question, what is the right place to look at internet art? Then later, 2 years ago, I made this show in an XPO gallery in Paris, where each of these digital pieces was on a router, on a wall, and the router is not in the internet, it's offline, but the piece is on there. So it's directly on a USB drive on the router. So you connect with your phone to this hardware, which is usually used to go online, but everything you can see in your browser is one artwork. And I like very much to engage with that question, and to play. And I also think Lindsay is very right. I mean, on one hand, it's obvious we all know that the art market still is painting is still the sellable thing. But when you watch everything, when you look at art from the perspective of market, it's very distorted, right? I mean, it's nothing you want to look at art only from there. So, but the question is it's an interesting question, and there's many solutions to it. And of course, also, I don't know, I was in the beginning of the year in the art fair in Munich, and there was this discussion around with exhibitions, and there's all these different platforms, and people have different approaches to it. And also, I think some are stronger, some are more questionable, but it's good that also the auctions, which are Lindsay started off. It's very good to see all these things now spreading, just it's kind of taking off, like these questions in art world. And that's very encouraging, I think, also for like young artists today. I mean, well, they do maybe drawing, a sculpture, an animated GIF, and a video, and they just cross over, and it's totally fine. It's like there's no question about it, and it's a big relief, I think.
Definitely, I think you're very right with the thing that I think in most of the students nowadays, in terms of new media or fine arts, even who are studying it, they're kind of putting it already on the same level as something as sculpture and fine arts, and then there's the internet-based or net art. There was so much now in it. What I still would love to pick on just for a bit, I think we're running quite quickly out of time, and we still want to have a bit of time for the audience, is again maybe talking about the value and about the actually selling process. And maybe, I mean, that, Lindsay, this is the second auction you're doing now with Philips, and I think it is really interesting to let the audience know a bit more about the development and about the kind of what went better, and like the value, and talking about money in a way as well, and how does it sell.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've actually learned that talking about money is not people's favorite thing in relationship to art, but
that's why he has the question marks.
But when I've been working in this project space, I had started to notice that a lot of artists who are making some of the most exciting digital work that I was seeing were having to take these day jobs to work either maybe in an advertising agency or doing something with these amazing digital skills that they have, and then their art practice was kind of falling to the wayside. Or the other thing that was happening is that they were making physical objects. They were making paintings and sculptures, and then forgetting about their net art practice or their digital practice, because that's not what could sustain them. So they were making really practical decisions. So I started to realize, like I said a few years back, that there was really an essential urgency to create some sort of market that could support this work. Because as excellent and as amazing as residencies are and grants are, they don't allow the same kind of sustainability that currently the market is providing to other artists working in other platforms. So it's not to say that being involved in the market or being in an auction is going to save digital art, but it's one more potential option that has not been available to digital artists that we now are starting to open up, and it's actually doing quite well. So in the first auction, it sold, all of the works have a low and high estimate, and the overall sale sold 90% of the high estimate for all of the works, which is pretty phenomenal actually in terms of how auctions go. And what we discovered is that people were actually really excited about the purely digital works. We had a YouTube video that I showed from Petra Courtwright that sold to an incredible collector at the high estimate. Videos, the website went to Amazing Collector. There are people coming up in the next generation, and even not the next generation, people who are just working maybe in tech or working in social media, who have a strong relationship and interest in this work and want to continue to support the artists. So we're trying to make connections, and with the belief that digital art is the most contemporary art. And in the sale that we have currently at Philips, the exhibition is up concurrently with the other contemporary art evening and day sales. So as collectors walk through and they view, Andy Warhol or these kinds of other Banksy, these other artists, they would also walk through this exhibition and see how easily these works coexist together, a video and a sculpture, a website and a painting, and how these can actually create really beautiful, lovely, very contemporary collections. And so that's really the goal. And we're very conscious that this is an emerging market. So typically auctions, you'll take consignment from collectors, but for this sale, all of the works are coming directly from the artists themselves and from their gallery. So 100% of the proceeds goes back to the artist, so that they can continue to build up their practice. So we're just trying to basically help artists build relationships, help galleries build relationships, and really, like I said, accelerate the market for this so that this can be a viable career option for artists moving forward.
I was just curious, in terms of that, because it's like the really important aspect of what you were saying was the fact that what you're doing is about sustaining and supporting the artists and the artwork rather than kind of making a fortune off of them, so to speak. But, I mean, I'm sure some people would like to do that as well. But I think, obviously the value of their work is the fact that it's public and that it's open source and that there's like this and it's quite lo-fi in a lot of ways. It's a kind of something that you can access easily, you can engage with at your own kind of pace and that sort of thing. So it seems like a really interesting kind of challenge to kind of to kind of support and sustain that type of work for artists through a kind of market model. But I'm curious if there are other models that you've kind of experimented with or you see coming up around in terms of digital culture, because obviously the art market and this notion of kind of galleries and collectors and sustaining artists in that way is an old model. I mean, it's a 19th century model. So are there other kind of ways in which you see people trying to explore forms of supporting themselves apart from getting day jobs?
Well, unfortunately, that seems to be the most popular strategy, and that's a short-term one as well because it's not very satisfying. But what I've noticed actually is that galleries and curators and institutions are not the ones leading the way on this. It's really the artists who are leading the way and creating practices or best practices that are extensions of their creative work. So in the way that Petra monetizes her work based on views, or Raphael is using this contract, or another one of the pieces in the auction is an algorithm based that averages the top selling works in current auction sales to create the most ideal painting. And then it has a GPS tracking device on it. So as it moves from location to location, the artist can track it. So there are ways that artists are sort of integrating with this market in a way that is disrupting it or playing with it. And we are using this platform to be able to lend some of the power of what an auction house is able to do to increase the volume of their voices, basically. But I would say that it's definitely the artists who are going to be coming up with the next model that's going to replace this market model. Yeah. And I don't know if it completely exists yet. I actually really believe in the gallery model. I think it's really important that artists have that other advocate who is thinking about the long-term strategy for a career and then also handling the administration of their career. There is kind of an increasing trend of collectors going directly to the artist's studio and buying that way because of the internet. You don't really need the intermediary of the art advisor or the gallery, but it creates other complications in that then the artist is negotiating on their own behalf, and that's not always maybe the best strategy or situation to be in.
While Lindsay was talking about the and Aaron as well about the sustainability and the long-term piece of art that is still in our heads to create and to be there forever. It popped up that Aaron, you once did that format of speed projects and the idea of correct me when I'm wrong, but of being free and feeling free and just doing it within 8 hours or two days. And maybe you can talk a bit about that project, which I think links quite funnily in that whole discussion.
It's this format. I mean, it's very much FatLab, which is this artist group you also introduced in the beginning. I'm part of, and it's around, I don't know, 80 to 20 people, mostly spread all around the world, but we meet mostly only online in this blog and releasing projects there. Also, a lot of them very digital projects, and there's a certain way of, that was my own experience producing works, and I always, also all the physical work I do, I used to release, publish on the internet, but since Tumblr and all these Twitter and this different feeds is very fast. So you publish something and maybe it has lots of views and it gets shown in different blogs and written about. And it takes you a long time to build it or something. So you can't, there's no way to keep up with the speed of the internet in terms of producing art, unless you do like really fast, short projects. And this is something which FatLab was doing anyway already. Like people were doing quick projects, DIY tutorials, browser add-ons, which it's like a little trick for something. And I just like coined that term, like speed project, as a label and also like as a trademark. What is it, like a proof of like the stamp, proof stamp. This project was done in less than, I think the maximum time is like 8 hours one day, but usually like a speed project is like 5 minutes or 30 minutes. And it's something, so for me it was a tool to produce works which are like very fast, and I can just throw like some good idea I had today, I can just throw at the internet and it's done. And at the same time, I can also produce work which takes more time, and it's like more thought in it. And like it's like, as an artist practice, it was very helpful for me to make this. And well, yeah, of course, like these sort of speed projects, there's no, I mean, that's not a question about monetizing or like if you can sell it or not. It's just like things you publish online, and the value lies in how people pick up on it. Like, for example, Dead Drops with the USB drives, like, became such a huge project when I started it in New York. Like after I arrived, like it was like the whole week I was sick, and I was like, oh, I do this little project I wanted to do. Like I have no idea if this will ever work. And boom, like sometimes you don't know that stuff gets picked up like super quick online, and then then it's open and people can remix it, can do their own versions, and it's very rewarding to leave stuff open on the web and to see how like people do their own versions. Like you get a lot of feedback. It's much it's like a way, I don't know, like this whole sharing culture there is a very rewarding, beautiful thing. Like and yeah, at that point, well, like your reputation is like the only thing you can win on that site. But well, yeah.
That's a big thing, though.
Well, yeah, it's also, of course, it's a value. Of course,
yeah.
I mean,
I think it's one of the biggest values. So, guys, we're running really, really late. So I would just give a short, quick closing question, or just encourage you to give me some thoughts about the idea of coming back to the actual reality term, the big word of how do you think personally kind of influences your work, or how is your work influenced by it, and how does it influence reality, and what is the initial idea of you, why are you doing it, like?
But how about like is there audience questions coming, or?
Yeah, we're doing that. Just
okay.
Just like one, if you have some thoughts. If not, we directly go to the audience questions.
Yeah, is it for me now or for everyone?
It's for everyone, but you could start. You feel free to start.
Well, no, I just so like maybe somebody.
For everyone, one sentence. No.
Well, I mean, it's like just what I maybe said before. I think it's very good to see now how things open up, and like how this less questions, or maybe the questions still exist, but it's nice to see how like the digital influence or internet aware art or post internet art, or however you want to call it, all these different currents, like it's like a broad perspective, and it's very encouraging to see like these young people like making all kinds of works in any medium, and I like this.
Aaron or Lindsay, any from your point, just coming back to the linking the work of photography and of your way, like how does that like kind of influences the reality we live in now, or the digital culture?
Well, I mean, for me, from my perspective, the relationship between the medium that I'm interested in and that I use, the relationship between photography and reality is a really complicated and complex one, and that's something that's happening in a digital environment as well as a kind of analog environment. So in terms of what's happening digitally, I don't think people kind of talk about these kind of great shifts and these huge evolutions and this rapid kind of change. And I think those, there is a kind of rapid change happening, but I think a lot of these ideas and debates have been going on for generations. Whenever a new form of technology or a new medium has kind of been introduced into the culture. I think the important thing to remember, is that these mediums, they aren't the reality. A photograph isn't a reality. The internet isn't a virtual reality. They're simply kind of mediums through which we engage with the real. They're a part of our reality, but they're also a kind of way of translating, interpreting, and communicating the realities that we experience. So, I don't see it as a kind of an and or, kind of. Well, I don't see it as an or mentality. It's more of an and. There's this kind of culture. There is a reality, and then we have these tools, whether they be photographs or digital, means, or online, or taking remnants of the digital culture and transposing them into the real world, into the physical world. I think all of those things are important, but I think we have to be careful not to lose sight of the fact that reality is separate from the mediums in which we engage with it.
Mm. Sure.
It's like we always have like these classic pairs of terms like real, virtual, digital, analog, and it's so much connected today. Like, I mean, we are like within this entanglement, and you cannot like put it separate anymore.
I think that's a good thing about it as well, and there's a potential in it that we don't see the borders anymore that much, or the limitations, and just go maybe at some point even beyond them. Who knows? Lindsay, anything from your side, or?
Yeah, I've been really interested in Fat Lab's work, the Free Art and Technology Lab, for quite some time, and interested in the open source movement. And it seems to embody these utopian ideas of freedom and openness, and that's what the web is. But I'm growing increasingly suspicious of those strategies, because I think that inherent in them is some sort of Western Christian idea that money is inherently wrong. But I think that social media platforms, maybe Facebook, are actually accruing and getting very, very, very wealthy based on the idea that you should share everything that you have. So every time you upload photos, you share what your interests are, they're making money off of you being open and you having that kind of generosity. So what I'm advocating for now is more of a sense of a hit of reality, I guess, to say that all of these platforms are actually essentially about money, and even open source and freedom has an inherent value that's tied to it. That makes me sound really pessimistic, but that's where I'm at right now.
Thank you. No, there were some really big words in it, and freedom is never a pessimistic word, so I guess we are fine. I would like to open up now for some public questions, if there are even any, or hand over the word to Alex for a second.
Thanks a lot. Who wants to ask the first question? Are there any questions?
If there are none, then we can just talk.
I think this
no, we have one. Wait a second.
We approached reality in the virtual or the digital reality from different aspects during the past months since November. And following now what you said, I wanted to know if you think that, especially talking about artists and different medium with which they work, they were kind of forced into the internet because of not only the recent crisis, but somehow there was no other alternative, and the web or the digital platforms are packed.
I think.
Are we on mute or are we loud?
Hello? Yeah, maybe, but we are about to expect another alternative. Or just maybe the first part of the question, that this is an appearance that was the only alternative, and it's packed, and it's rather a consequence of no other alternative, like no contacts to galleries, no contacts to curators, and then what do you have? You just have the digital reality, and you cannot build up an alternative one.
I think especially Aaron and Aram can maybe pick up on that if you want to, because you're both working quite closely to that one subject. And
for me, the volume was a bit low in the beginning, but as far as I understood, I mean, was that question about like being forced into the internet or not, or what are the alternatives? For me, of course, like I kind of grew up with it, and it was always like my first medium. I started releasing works online, like documentations, before I talked to galleries and anything else. Like even before I was like at this like moment of, oh yeah, I want to become an artist. So this was very natural to me all the time. It's like, I think what's important to understand today, it's not so much about, oh yeah, there's the internet and then there's like all the other world. It's like everything is in the internet now, like, and all art is like perceived through the internet, like all the paintings and all, like, I mean, like all the Gerhard Richter paintings, most people see them online, right? In web pages, in pictures. So it's not like, I think it's, well, at some point, like 20 years ago, when net art started, like there was a very early, like, avant-garde, and the medium itself was so new that only few people had access. And this was like very medium specific, but now it's so broad that like the whole culture is in there anyway, sort of. It's, for me, it's not so much, well, there's a lot of questions about how internet works, and what Lindsay just said with like the big services and about surveillance and these things. But, and also, of course, it has impact on how we like perceive art and how curators curate art through online platforms and all these things. But it's not a separate thing anymore. It's like when I see in, like, I think they stopped it now, but in Süddeutsche Zeitung they had like still like a year ago they had like this column on the side of the front page, like news from the internet. It's like, come on guys, like, I mean, the news are on the internet, and you are like this printed book every day, right? It's like you print a book every day and then you throw it away. This is like, I mean, of course, like we are used to these concepts, but when you think about it, it's like, seems, yeah, crazy sometimes. So, well, I don't know if I answered this question, but I think on one hand we talk about digital art, but at the same time, it's good to consider that all the art is online, like not everything, but you can see much more now than what you were able to see like 20 years ago.
And what I'm starting to see a group of artists do is, in response to the pervasiveness of the internet, are actively trying to disappear from it in an artistic kind of way. So there's one artist I'm thinking of specifically, Jasper Spacero, who...
Who's that?
Jasper.
I never heard of him. Like, where is he?
Okay, perfect. So he creates these exhibitions that you're not allowed to view. They're usually in residential spaces. He installs them, photographs them, photoshops them, uploads them onto the internet, and then that's it. They never have any kind of audience engage with them in the physical space. And then in terms of the way that he handles his social media, if he gets more than 5 to 10 likes or repost on something that he puts up, then he'll remove it and then repost it again later in the day. So he's trying to emphasize this idea of ephemerality, and also just a desire to be engaged because you kind of sort of have to, as you said, but also disengage with the network so that that's not determining the success of your work. It's not about just popularity, but it's about creating this sort of temporary experience.
Yeah. Well, of course, there's always
like a happening or something.
There's like, on one hand, that's what I experience myself a lot. When you have like this big feedback online, you also get hooked on like, oh yeah, it's like, I want that peak again, etc. And at the same time, not necessarily good art, which is like very popular online. So, and of course, there's a lot of artists also have lots of different concepts on how to represent themselves online. I think, and now there's like also even like this backslash of, oh yeah, I don't have a web page and I don't have this and that, or like there's different ways doing it.
I still think, like, because you just said the backflash, I still think there's we have that, there is that freedom still in the heads of the most of the artists, and I guess we wouldn't sit even here if there would be those still quite different opinions and point of views on that, if we are forced into that, or if you're doing it completely freely. Are there any other questions? Or do we still have time even?
I have a question. We heard a couple of times that digital is not a counterpart, and not everything is connected, and you can't separate it when you talk about it. When we talked to people about the meaning of digital, we always had the feeling that there's a lot of anxiety because of its disruptive quality. And what we try to do is to focus a little bit more about the perspective, or maybe about the chances. Aaron, when we talked before, you said maybe it finally let something like photography become what it always should be. So maybe you can say something about that.
Yeah, I mean, going back to the last question as well, there was, I think, photographers, when digital culture kind of started, sorry, I'm hearing myself echoing, so it's kind of funny.
Yeah, you're echoing.
Yes. When photographers started dealing with digital culture, there was a reluctancy, I think, because people felt it was some sort of a kind of threat to their uniqueness and their profile. I don't know. There was certainly a kind of reluctance and a kind of distrust of digital technology, partly because images are so easily shared and so easily grabbed and screen grabbed and cut and pasted and that sort of thing. I think the younger generation doesn't feel that way at all. I think photography, from my perspective, it's changing the definition of what it means to be an artist or a photographer or a cultural producer, whatever whatever term you want to put on it. But I think that those kind of terms are really limited in the sense that the common phrase within photography is that everyone's a photographer now, and I think that's absolutely true. But that's kind of always been the case for the last 20 or 30 years, at least, with cameras. So I think what the internet offers us and what digital culture offers us is opportunities to kind of learn new ways of kind of functioning and communicating through the mediums that we choose to use, whether those be websites or paint or sculptures or performance. But I think there's an opportunity. I think that the digital culture offers an opportunity in a cheap alternative and an easy way of kind of communicating to a vast number of people, whatever it is you want to say. Again, I think it's important to keep in mind that it's not. Personally, what I'm not so much interested in isn't so much a medium as in what an artist or someone is trying to kind of communicate or say to me. So I think the digital environment offers a huge amount of potential for that, and it's changing the way in which we kind of engage with visual imagery, moving image, sound, and how we just simply kind of read information. So I think that's a good thing, not a threatening thing.
I think that was kind of a really, really good last sentence. If there are any other questions, I would now leave it with that kind of positive attitude towards the whole discussion we had in the talk. Oh, there's another one. Sorry.
Hi. Hello. Hi there. I just have a small question. First, thank you for giving us these insights of your work and of your, let's say, perception. I just shortly wanted to know, how do you actually see our future? Because you said that the analog world and that the digital world are not separated anymore, and we have like a unity of all of that. But what's going to be the next step, for example, in arts, in your opinion? How will it look like? Will there be pictures, for example?
Well, yeah, I'm not sure if I'm the right person to answer this question. But on one hand, that's my impression. It's like, of course, there's always very vibrant new borders, like ideas, reactions, development in art. And at the same time, also there's art. The whole arts world is also not the always like the fastest one, right? It's like there's also like I don't know, just or when you compare it to politics, like they have a lot of problem keeping up with like what's developing in technology, and so today we have these powerful like global companies, internet companies who have like. It's like when they say in Germany, oh yeah, the government met with Facebook and Google. It's like they don't meet another country, they meet a company. And like when you want to know about the future, like you should take a look at what Google is doing and what's going to be next, because it's quite easy to predict there. How this is like impacting on art, yeah, I'm not the right person, but I'm sure there will be galleries for a long time. Like some sort of so certain things like stay the same, and there will always be pictures to hang on the wall. I'm quite sure. But it's like the interesting stuff is maybe happening somewhere on the fringes. Like,
I mean, from my perspective, sorry.
No, go on, Aaron.
From my perspective, I think the future. I mean, partly what Lindsay was saying kind of made me think this, but I think artists for so long have been dependent on patrons, initially with patrons and patronage, whether it's the Pope or, the royalty, or then they became dependent upon collectors and galleries and museums and that sort of thing. And I think what the future might hold, or at least there might be space for, is the fact that the artists aren't necessarily, they can become independent in a really interesting way. I know that's an idealistic thing to say, and I understand that it's complicated in terms of the monetary aspects and how artists support themselves. But I think that art itself is becoming something that's much more democratic and ubiquitous, and that a 9-year-old kid can upload a YouTube clip of some kind of weird performance that he's doing, and an 85-year-old man can dance at a wedding and upload that, and all of these things can be kind of interpreted. Maybe the definition of what art is. I mean, it's been in question now for at least 60 years. So maybe we're moving towards something, a new definition of what art is and what artists are. Maybe being an artist isn't a profession. It's simply a part of life. I don't know.
That's beautiful. I think that, I'm seeing a lot of, just in terms of like practical things, I'm seeing a lot of institutions receiving a lot of support to be able to in turn support artists who are creating this kind of work. So I think there will be more of a proliferation and respect for digital art in the next 5 to 10 years. I am also seeing a lot more 3D printing projects happening in studios and an interest in the physicality. But I think overall we're going to see more expanded practices that I think eventually objects are going to seem very quaint, but it's going to be more than that. It's going to be some combination of conceptual art with internet art, that all of these things are fueling a single series or a single project, that it's going to be all of these different kinds of ways of interpreting an idea become the artwork. Because that's how our experience is now. We are on our phones all the time, and we're also engaging in conversation, and our attention is split between many different things. And I think that that's going to be reflected in artistic practice, where it's not just one simple, beautiful work of art. It's that piece connected to a website that's also connected to some essay or some other kind of way of extending and expanding the practice beyond just a single object.
I think what we all hear from all of you and the opinions of all of you guys is that kind of we're still in the process, and I think this might be one of the common thoughts on that maybe it's too early to ask the question what happens in 20 years. I think even the artists and artists themselves, they're still learning. They're still learning to find the identity, to who they are with the tool, to kind of even interact with that medium, which is still so vague. It doesn't have like a final definition. And I guess it's happening just right now. And maybe we should just stay in the reality and just see what's happening. Alex, do you want to say something?
I don't think we have any questions anymore, right? Anybody? No. Okay. So I want to thank you all for your time. And yeah, I think we will stick around for a bit here. And Inga, you will be you will be here in a couple of minutes because you're not in London or in Stuttgart. And yeah, thank you and have a great evening.
Thank you.
Bye bye.
I want to thank you as well again for your time and have a good night. Thank you very much. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.